Just takes a second. All right, there we go. So we have with us Gerry Fialka. Thank you so much for joining us today. I've had some time to sort of do a little bit more further research on people who you've worked with alongside your life, such as the amazing oh my gosh, I just blanked out there for a second. Frank Zappa and the mothers of all invention. So you worked for you worked directly with Frank Zappa, correct?
Well, let's clarify. First of all, Frank Zappa started a group called the Mothers of Invention. He was creating before the Mothers of Invention. Then the Mothers of Invention existed for so long, and then he was called Zappa. And when I worked for him, approximately from 83 to 93, 9.5 years, he was basically called Frank Zappa. He wasn't having that name, the Mothers of Invention. Now, I'm for probing the hidden psychic effects, the deeper level. I learned this from a great Canadian, since you're Canada born and resident, Marshall McLuhan. And he was like deep sea diver. You know, you can talk about surface things and that's fine, but you can go deeper. They call it, the subconscious, the unconscious. So when I was born in Flint, Michigan in 1953, my mother, Dolores Fialka, named me, and my father, Albert Fialka, named me after Saint Gerard. I was raised a Roman Catholic. Saint Gerard is not my name, it's Gerald, but the patron saint of mothers is Saint Gerard. So they named me after the patron saint of mothers, and I was destined to become an employee of the Mothers of Invention. But in essence, to be very clear, I'm not an employee of the Mothers of Invention. I was an employee of Frank Zappa's office, which he had many names in Intercontinental Absurdities. Why not? And I was sort of in part of his company called Barfco Swill. So it's like you barf stuff and it's a big swill, and it was basically rock and roll dry goods. You sold t-shirts and albums and stuff that Frank couldn't necessarily sell through stores. Right. He sold it through mail order business, and he had a hotline. So, he was one of the only rock stars who really had a hotline where you got to speak to a human being. So any weird kid in the world could call up and say, what does it mean when Frank says in the middle of his song, when the shit hits the fan? They did, they lived in a country, they didn't know that cliche. And so I had explained it to him. I become friends. So it's basically, I want to buy this music score, or I want to buy this Zappa album. And, I'd take their information. But, the Grateful Dead had a hotline, but it was basically a tape. And they would say, here's where we're playing. This is pre-internet.
Right.
And it was, so it was fun because I learned to meet and I learned to be a shrink for Zappa fans. People your age, younger than you would call up and say, hey, all the kids in my school like the Beastie Boys and Van Halen. I like Zappa. Am I okay? And I go, yeah, you're okay. I always called myself a Zappa shrink, because they're sort of rebels and outsiders, and they're trying to probe the different, and they're normal people too. Music is music. If it works, it works. And like you in probing your research, which I appreciate, Rob, that you did that, is you learned that Frank was articulate in his interviews.
Very.
In being articulate, he actually said, my interviews are part of my musical creative output. He basically said the big note is his output. It's one big note. So it's radio shows, interviews, live music shows, movies, And everything he did is part of his art form.
Well, one thing that I noticed about Frank was in his art and his ability in his speaking was that he really cared about his fans. Like, he understood the power of his fans more so than I think most artists today really understand. I mean, I saw an interview with David Letterman, and there was a guy wearing, short pants or whatever, and he's like, I came here to see Frank Zappa. And they're kind of making fun of him or whatever. But Frank said, hey, those are my fans. Like, don't make fun of them. Those are my people.
But there's a big thing you just discussed that's very important. When you're a satirist, which Frank was,
deeply so.
David Letterman comes out of comedy too, and he's a gracious host. I'll give you the flip of that. Frank was on Joan Rivers' TV show once, and she's the queen of cut downs, and Frank's sort of the king of cut downs, cutting people down, let's say. And she comes out and does her monologue at the beginning of the show and says, yeah, Frank Zappa named his kids like Moon Unit, Dweezil. And then him and Gail were like, go, let's name this one on that. There it again. And she implied Frank and Gail were drinking or, got wild, hippie, riled, 60s parents and named their kids all these funny names. And then when Frank came out and says, yeah, like, don't make fun of my kids' names, it's like, get over it. You're the king of cut downs and she's cutting you down. So, it's like, try to tell a joke to a comedian. They don't want to laugh. They want to be the comedian. So, satire is a funny thing. I'll tell you the most important thing I learned in studying Marcel Duchamp art, John Cage, experimental music, Frank Zappa, theatrical rock, many things, filmmaking, Louis Buñuel, filmmaking, and many others, Lenny Bruce, and all the great satirists. It's called Manipian Satire when you use the medium itself as part of the satire. Now, everything is, you raise South Park or Simpsons, or everything is Manipian satire now. They're always poking at themselves. But it is an important art form to understand that behind every joke, there's a grievance, is what Steve Allen told us. Now, I don't agree with that because it's not necessarily behind every joke, but there's something deeper to satire than just making fun to get a laugh. It's like, why do you pick that? So, there's an old phrase that goes, you create what you resist. And Bob Goldthwait, he morphed it into you are what you hate. And James Joyce took it even farther. He says, isn't it curious that you're super saturated in the religion that you say you disbelieve? So, Louis Buñuel, back to the great filmmaker, said, thank God I'm an atheist. So
thank God. Yeah.
Thank God I'm an atheist. So he knew that when you poke fun at something, it's actually your fingers pointing right back at you. There's something in you that might be lacking or you want to aspire to.
I agree.
Now, one of the greatest Canadian Zappa people ever, Bob Dobbs, said this line, and I think it's important. He says, Frank reverently satirized what he loved a lot. So he reverently satirized Black music, but he came directly out of Black music. I can name them: Hubert Sublin, Johnny Guitar Watson, Guitar Slim, Johnny, all these great guitarists. That's where he came out of. But he also came out of Stravinsky, he came out of Spike Jones, he came out of Edgar Varese. But he would satirize Black music, but it was reverently. But you might, as the listener, go, oh my God. And I can give you the kudos to who brought us together was Roger Stephens, who is the most knowledgeable person on earth about Bob Marley, and all the power to him. Bob Marley is a powerful, wonderful human being. And
Yes.
again, he had his failings and his strengths. And if anybody, Roger could suss that out. But who made fun of Bob Marley? Not many people. And in the middle of Joe's Garage by Frank Zappa, he goes, "We're jamming," and he's making fun of Bob Marley jamming. Nobody really gets it. He liked to, when reggae got really big, Frank started playing reggae chops in the middle of his satirical songs and his serious songs, and he would have reggae beats going, and then he throws out, "We're jamming." And it's like, I think that's so funny that he has the balls to fucking make fun of Bob Marley. No one's doing that, and he was a serious satirist. He had an anti-Jesse Jackson song. He had an anti-union song. I mean, Frank was a good human being, and he knew the struggle of the working person more as well as anybody, but he also said, "I'm a devout capitalist." And he knew when he went into these ice rinks to play rock and roll in ice rinks and hockey arenas and in big stadium. Well, he wasn't a big stadium act. Frank was more a 3,000 person act. He wasn't a 10,000 person act.
Right.
But he would go in there and the union guys go, "No, you can't do that. We got to do that." He's going, "Well, my crew can do it better." And so he wrote a song, about sort of being anti-union. So we know that unions have services and disservices. You're a school teacher. Are you in a union?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is it 50% to your liking? 80, 20? No. Where do you give it percentage wise that they help you? What, just a guesstimate range?
I would say that unions are good because well, actually, this brings it up to the age-old question, right? Is it what's worse, absolute control or absolute freedom?
Yeah. Yeah.
And with unions, it protects the goal of unions is to protect workers.
Right. But Rob, just give me the guesstimate. You like being in the union 20%, 50, 80, just give me a range that you like at 100.
Honestly, to be completely honest, I'd say about 20% because I'm just not really involved in any.
Yeah, you like the union you're in 20%. You like that you have to be in a union 20%. That's fine. But you're not like going, "I'm stopping teaching because I hate, the 80% that you go.
Definitely not doing that because I wouldn't have a job if I did that.
There you go. And you learned what this is an important word that will come up a lot today in our discussion is coping. Now it carries this baggage. Coping carries this baggage. But I want to tell you right off the bat, you did great because you answered a question that I asked you with a question. So that is what McLuhan's all about. He's saying, let's invent new metaphors and new questions rather than there are no right answers, but we can pursue right answers. So, where were we? I wanted to go back and resolve the question was that Frank was a satirist, and satire is probably invented by human beings. And so what I mostly pursue in study of McLuhan, and his main inspiration is a book called Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce. Came out in 1939. He this Irish writer basically invented Zoom, TikTok, internet, Facebook, and he disguised it as a book. See, here's the book. It's got pages, pages, but it's not. This is a book you have to read out loud with a group of people. So you do something that it's not supposed to be done with that. How do you make a book that's not a book? And Zappa did this. How are you a rock star guest DJ on a radio show that's not doing that? Frank did it perfectly. He played a record skip for 17 minutes on a radio show, just a record skip. of 17 minutes. So
Right.
that's it. So John Cage, you might not know, but he wrote a song called 433, and it's for four.
Silence.
Yeah,
Well,
the silent piece, you know. Yeah.
but
And
it's not actually, what's interesting about that piece is it's not silence,
right. And
right?
it's in the context of being in a concert hall and you still hear sounds, but it's known as a silent piece. So, how do you write a book that's not a book Finnegan's Wake? How do you write a piece of music that's not a piece of music? Cage 433. You know, Frank wrote a song that's total Cagean. It's called Dead Air. You can watch it on
Hmm.
YouTube. For 20 seconds, he does this. For 20 seconds, it says it's called dead air. There's no sound and it's dead air. So, that is how we can learn, just to stay the thread, to cope with the things we don't like about our inventions. We can learn to cope with them by figuring out how they shape our behavior, or trying to figure out, because all we do is we wrap ourselves around SteamYard, which we're using right now.
Right.
We wrap ourselves around, everybody else would call this Zoom. Who's zooming who, as Aretha Franklin would say. Or we wrap ourselves around the internet and we just don't know really how it's shaping our behavior. We just engage in
Oh
it.
yes, yeah. Well, I mean, you're almost describing a zeitgeist, this idea of zeitgeist. Like, we don't necessarily, even when we read history, books, let's say it's 100-year-old history book, it's The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire by Edward Gibbons. And we would read that now and think of one country in particular and draw, connections between where we are now and what we're consuming. So I guess it almost goes to say that all art is timeless, because whenever we see the art before us, we're seeing it with the eyes and our perceptions and the schemas that we have right now in this present moment. Like when we were looking at Francis Bacon paintings, we draw connections between that and some of these serial killer films that we see. But it's still our, what's the word for it? Freedom of association, right? We're always, if we were able to step back and look at the universe, it would not make any sense. But we have to make patterns, because patterns equal sanity, and chaos and disorder is insanity. So we would all be, to use a Foucaultian sort of history of madness, are mad people the truly free ones? I've heard it said that paranoid people are overly rational. It's not a lack of rationality, it's too much, realizing that the threat of society is so weak and frail. So that's kind of where I'm going with this idea of everything we see is influenced by the perceptions of the things we've already seen, which brings up that timeless question of what came first, feeling or consciousness, that you and Roger spoke about in your interview, which was unreal, by the way.
Right. Thank you. Well, let's go to that question in a second, because you touched on so many major things in your few words there that was important. One, and just go, history is written by the people who win. If you go to the movie by Errol Morris called Fog of War, McNamara, a known war criminal and a guy who ran, military operations in America, he basically says, I committed war crimes, sort of, he says it, but I write the history because I won. So now that's important to know, what history, a human invention, has services and disservices. Now, to say, well, I don't like history, what you're doing is not enabling yourself to get the big picture. The big picture is, you go to the great philosopher and mathematician Pascal, and he said, in order to understand anything, you have to know this end of the spectrum and that, and everything in between. So you if you have a point of view and go, I love history, or I don't like to study history, then you're limiting yourself. Now, in your lonely teenage room, you can go, I hate history, I love Facebook, I hate Facebook. But when you're with one or more people, if you refrain from a point of view, and Marshall nailed it, McLuhan said, understanding is not having a point of view. Now, we might be hardwired to have a point of view, especially when it comes to history. If you study Raoul Peck's new film, Eliminate the Brutes, and he comes right out of Howard Zinn, you'll go, wait a minute. There's a different history here that wasn't told. And I'm going to tell you a different history. You know, Americans killed a lot of American Indians, indigenous Cherokee Navajos, and that's genocide. You know, and that we don't get that. You don't get that in the history books so clear.
Right.
And now they're saying, well, so history is an important topic brought up. Probably the most important word you said in that last rap, Rob, was patterns. What McLuhan, Frank, Zappa, Duchamp, all these people I study, they were pattern recognizers. You study the patterns,
Right.
which leads to comprehensive awareness. You get the big picture. And then you can say, I like this or that. You can have aesthetics. But the one thing you said that really got me was chaos. Some people say chaos is insanity. So that's where you're taking a value judgment, or not you, but people will say, well, chaos is bad. They would go, no, chaos is probably, it's a word invented by humans. This is the big thing I pursue. Is it more innate in humans or more invented? But chaos has services and disservices. In the many years ago, if someone was crazy or insane, they might be considered the shaman of the village.
Exactly.
And so we invented mental illness. And we know that some people have erratic behavior and they kill people. It's like, wait a minute, dude, you shouldn't have killed them. So now what are we going to do about that action? You know, so we're going to say, well, we'll drug them or we'll we'll do this, we'll put them in therapy. I always say, get them to do yoga. That helps, you know. But the last thing is just to go to where you want to going just for a second is the question. You blended two of my questions. One of my questions is, are human beings more feeling beings or more thinking beings? It's a stupid question because we're both and you can't separate them. But because we invented the words feeling and thinking, head and heart, we can think we can separate them. But I will ask people constantly, just in general, your observations. I know it's both and it depends. Are humans more feeling or more thinking? They usually go like this. I think they're more feeling. They literally say that 80%. My one friend, the great Eric Dugdale.
That's satire right there.
Yeah, no, the great Eric Dugdale goes, I feel we're more thinking. Now, you know, Bridget, I can go through all the thinking quotes. You know, George Clinton says, think it ain't illegal yet. The Marx Brothers are in a fix. And one says to the other, I think we got to think. And he goes, no, we already tried that. And then, you know, Captain Beefheart says, I had too much to think. So, you know, we're trying it. Whenever I do anything like this dialogue with other people, I learn from McLuhan, who teased people to believe his percepts, which is your heart, were concepts. He teased people. So he's a book writer and an academic. You can't have percept really in academia. You have to have concepts. Okay, Robert, 1 + 1 is 2. Repeat it back to me. 1 + 1 is 2. That's academia. Now it's more than that, but that's basically percept is your perception, which is your hunch, your feeling, your emotion, your impulse. So some people go, well, yeah, maybe we are more thinking beings. So I just pose the question, and are we more feeling or more thinking? And the person who trumps it all is Bridget Bardot. She said, I don't think when I make love. It's like, good luck. You know, I mean, if you're making love, you want to surrender to a sensual experience and become one with your partner. You don't want to be thinking about
Yeah.
the refrigerator. Oh man, did I get that?
Right.
Oh, I forgot to call my mom. Or the washing needs done. You don't want, but you can't stop your brain from thinking. That's
Yeah.
meditation. So that's one question. Are we more feeling or thinking? The other question, I think you're combining it with, which is fine. I'm all for combo burritos, is this line that I go, does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness? So the brain is thought of as an organ.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying the soul or the what do you call that? The mind. I'm saying, does the brain? So this is neuroscience. And usually,
Right.
sometimes people go, well, I'm not a neuroscientist. I goes, I'm not asking you to know neuroscience. I'm asking you for your hunch. Do you think, is consciousness just there, bubbling away, and we're creating it? Or are we just detecting it? So I get all kinds of answers on that. So that was interesting how you picked that up from Roger's interview. My interview with Roger is that you sort of combined two questions, but that's fine. I'm just differentiating the picture I go into
Right.
and trying to suss out, it's sort of evident. A lot of my questions, they're always answered the same. Are people more feeling or thinking? They go feeling, but
I think that they're feeling, yeah.
yeah, I think that they're feeling. I mean, that says it all.
But and there's another piece there of consciousness, and I think about it. I think about the difference between the brain and the mind as the difference between the computer and the internet. Right?
Well,
You destroy you destroy a computer, the internet still exists. If you
good.
destroy the brain, does consciousness still exist? That's what
Yeah,
I
you're
wonder.
saying you mean if the person dies, does their consciousness still exist? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
If
Yeah.
the body dies, does that soul consciousness still go into the sky, or into a tree, or into your memory? See, when your mom or dad die, your memory of them is what you're talking about, the consciousness of them. Like the dodo bird didn't go extinct. You can
It
still look
still
at a,
lives in her mind.
but you can still go to the internet and see a picture of it. So what do you, oh yeah, I mean a real dodo bird. Oh, okay, well, there's a simulation. So we don't know that.
Oh,
Yeah,
right.
we don't know that about the consciousness if it continues after the body dies. Me and you probably want to believe it does,
I
because
think,
we're,
yeah.
your father died, my father died too, and we want to think they're still around in some form because you can tap into them and love them. But that's just that we can't prove that. You can't prove
No,
anything.
yeah. And I mean, and that's the whole, that's where we get into utilitarianism in terms of our belief systems of,
What's that
what
word?
it's like what's the best, it's like the whole, okay, there's a train running down the tracks and you got to choose if it goes to the left side and hits your Uncle Dale, or it goes to the right side and hits 10 people. And you're like, well,
That's
what the
called,
fuck?
is
That's utilitarianism, but it's like, what the fuck are these people doing on the train tracks in the first place? Anyways, but it's the idea of a utilitarian will save the most people.
oh,
So
that's
they're
what,
all about utility. So when you see like androids in like sci-fi films, like that's an extreme utilitarian, like Dr. Manhattan in Watchmen. I don't know if you ever saw that.
yeah, I know
But
that.
kills Rorschach because he's a utilitarian, to keep people believing in the lie and to keep them safe. That's a
Yeah.
utilitarian. So now where was I going with this? Oh, yeah. So that's, I think, why some people make certain beliefs. I mean, just today I was working with a client, and this person they knew had passed away. And rather than tell them what happens, I'm like, well, what do you believe happens? What do you believe happened to your friend? And then he starts talking about, well, believe he went to heaven. And I'm like, okay, and tell me more about that. And the more that he's kind of explaining what heaven is to him, which again echoes what I kind of believe, you're right, this simulation where we keep alive the things we love. But on the other hand, I've heard, I don't have the facts to prove this, but when you die, the moment you die, you lose half a pound. And people say that is that your soul? Is that your consciousness? What is that leaves your body? That half a pound. And that's a significant amount, right? The burgers that I get at McDonald's don't even weigh a pound. So what is it that's leaving us? Now, again, this is just what I've heard from people. This isn't, anything that
I like that.
I can't footnote it. But
yeah.
what is this that leaves us?
That's a great thing, because you can make up footnotes.
Of course. Yeah.
And you can say the source. You got it from Steven Pinker, he hung out with Jeffrey. You better be leery of him now. But anyways, it's a beautiful thought, because Tim Leary teaches that if you practice lucid dreaming, when your body dies, your physical body dies, and you lose that half a pound. Is that what it is? A half a pound? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you lose that half a pound, that you can keep your consciousness going for 6 minutes, and you can direct your path because you practice. Lucid dreaming is sort of like daydreaming, setting up, what it is. Okay. So that's an interesting thing. I love this. I'm going to add it to my repertoire now. A half a pound goes plunk. Where's that half a pound go immediately? We got to find that out, because the neuroscientists will go, that's bullshit, or see, I wanted to go back 1 second, Rob, to something you brought up, because you brought up computer and internet, and those were both sort of form. There's an important thing to understand, and McLuhan made it famous, but it's misunderstood in his aphorism: the medium is the message. So if you're watching TV, most people interpret the medium is the message as, if you're watching TV, it doesn't matter what's on. It's that you're settled into this environment on the couch. You're staring at the TV, you're eating popcorn, you're relaxed, you're vegging out. So I asked my niece once, she was watching the stupidest show you could imagine. I says, why are you watching this? She goes, because nothing else is on. And it was like a good example. Now that sounds stupid, but in essence, she was saying to me, I've decided to take this 1 hour of my life to relax and veg out on the couch and just stare at the TV. It doesn't matter what's on. I'm just going through this ritual. Yeah. And McLuhan would say, it's like when you look at the newspaper in the morning, or your emails, and you drink your cup of coffee and you're settling in, you're like getting in a warm bath, that it's the environment. So when he said the medium is the message, he wasn't talking about a medium as one particular thing, like a computer, the internet, social media. He was saying, what is the environment that the internet creates? It's huge. It's massive. And there's many things. So this is what's called media ecology. Ecology is an organism's relationship with its environment. Right. So when we created cars, it created roads, billboards, plastic, tires, car clubs, radios in cars, everything. And here's a really good example, because I love art history and it's very important. Robert Rauschenberg was a pop artist, and they asked him, what kind of artist are you? He goes, I'm a landscape artist. And you look at his paintings and they're ripped up billboards all glued together, because the landscape he was living in was billboards. Right. So he was but landscape painting is usually thought of as trees, mountains, flowers, and sky. So, this is where there's a new nature. So once you understand that McLuhan's The Medium is a Message, which is hard to understand, but it is possible. And it's okay if you misunderstand it, because Marshall said it best. He said, a half a truth is still a lot of a truth. So, if you even get a little of McLuhan, that's good. But most people misunderstand him because they haven't read Finnegan's Wake out loud with a group of people, because that's where he learned that there's two things. There's the form and there's the content. So when you pick up Finnegan's Wake, when you start reading a book, you're in the mode of reading a book. You're looking
Right.
at words, and you want those words to, like, I'll give you the spookiest thing. John Lennon of the Beatles said when he read Finnegan's Wake, this book, he said, it felt as though I was a friend of James Joyce, that the author was talking to me. The guy who shot John Lennon carried a book around in his back pocket. It was called Catcher in the Rye. In the middle of that book, Holden Caulfield, the protagonist, says, when you're reading a book, it feels like the author's your friend. That's a spooky, but that's called conceptual continuity. That's what Zappa called it. McLuhan called it complex clairvoyance, but it's just connecting these patterns, like you go pattern recognition. So if you understand that everything we invent, spoken word, printed word, electronic word, has services and disservices, and you can suss out what you don't like about each one of those, then you can learn to cope with what you don't like about them by flipping a breakdown into a breakthrough. I'll give you a really good example. If you know punk rock at all, Iggy Pop in Michigan, he says, my band was so bad at imitating the Rolling Stones, we invented punk rock. So it's a funny example, but he learned, not consciously even, that he flipped a breakdown into a breakthrough. So that's when you suss out what you don't like about cars. I was raised in Flint, Michigan. My dad made money working for General Motors as an accountant to send me to college so I could learn all this crap and explain it, And so I praise the car industry for enabling me to get a great education and learn this, but I hate cars. Cars are stupid. They ruin the world and they're horrible. But I had a car. I'm 60 something, and I've probably had a car for 40 years of my life, and now I don't have one, and I love not having. I'm a bicycle person, but again, bicycles have services and disservices. So I don't want to say I hate cars. I want to say, well, what's the service of cars? It's a safe place I could have sex for the first time in my life. A car for me growing up was a radio on wheels. We would drive around and we would hit the button and change. We were DJs in our cars. We'd hit the button and change the station. So of course it's had services. I had 2 trips with my wife around the whole US for months, 2 months, 2 years in a row, and early in our career together. And it was amazing. But cars, like half my life is waiting at the street, waiting for the cars to clear so I can cross with my bike. Cars hate bicyclists, And
That
so
they do.
not all cars, not all car drivers.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? And again, what I'm doing is a Duchampian thing. I'm going to contradict myself so I don't conform to my own ideas. You shouldn't have point of view. You shouldn't say when you're with one or more people that you hate or love or hate anything. But sometimes I'm going to slip up and realize I'm a hypocrite.
Yeah, well, and I think that's what great comedy does. Great comedy, you go away and you think, holy shit, he's right. That's what great comedy does. I mean, Jerry Seinfeld, while I wouldn't say I laugh my head off when I listen to him, I listen to that guy and I'm like, this is me listening to Socrates 2,000 years from now. You these people at this time who we always quote, Seneca and Marcus Aurelius and all this stuff. Well, that's what Jerry Seinfeld is in, right now in this present moment into the future.
That's good. Yeah.
Right. And like you say, services, disservices. I mean, that's the internet. That's we made a Faustian deal when we started agriculture. We made a Faustian deal. We stopped living completely carefree. That was the death of freedom, was when we discovered agriculture, because we became bound to crops. And then it's all just been downhill since then, right? In terms of it,
Rob, you're making a value judgment. In one way,
yes.
One way it's been downhill. That's a disservice. Tell me one service of agriculture, just one.
Well, you get bread whenever you want it.
Well, there you go. So you know, I mean, if you can suss that out, that's called critical thinking. That's called aesthetics. That's all good. But when you're with one or more people, if you can sometimes practice suspended judgment, you can suss out how the invention is changing us.
I think that's a good point, because where I was going to is the dichotomy of existence.
Yeah.
Is that I think I asked you earlier, what's worse, which the value judgment, absolute freedom, or absolute control.
Yeah.
But the answer, like you've said before, some of these are self-evident, is you have to have a balance of the two.
Yeah.
Right.
No have tos.
Very, very good. Yes.
You could say I've learned that balance is important, but should'ves and gotta's and have tos I do not like. But I say it all the time too. Yeah.
Well, because we're slaves of our own, of our own language.
That's it. Slaves.
Right?
You nailed it. This is you have McLuhan in your blood without even knowing him. He said, if you don't study the effects of your inventions, you become slaves to them. So we are slaves. Most people, if I go, Rob, tell me one service of spoken word and one disservice.
I'd say what? Yeah.
Just tell me one service.
Great question. Well, service is our ability to share our memories, and disservice is gossip.
Well, gossip will keep you living longer. If you complain and you gossip, you live longer. But gossip carries baggage that we don't like. Gossip. Again, gossip has services and disservices. That was good. Now, let's just go through the three, because there's only three. Tell me one service of printed word and one disservice.
Service would be the ability to keep records. A disservice would be to make faulty records.
Okay, electronic word, which is we're combining right now spoken word and electronic word, because we're an electric. There's no electricity here, we wouldn't be here. And if anyone types in a question, that's electronic word. But we communicated, we became friends through electronic word. We became friends through email.
Which is so bizarre when you think about it.
Not through the telephone, which is spoken word. Now, one service, you're good at this too. One service of electronic word.
Service is the ease of it, the ease of communication.
One disservice of electronic word
is that we become reliant on it, and on that ease. I would say. So, if there was an EMP pulse, techno terrorists, right? Then it would be like, oh my God, how do I communicate with people again? I have deadlines to meet. How the fuck am I going to send things to people? Like carrier pigeon, right? So that's. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just really going to interject. This guy I'm going to interview this week, he's a experimental bass player. He plays with a lot of heavy rock stars. And I sent him an email. I says, I want to interview you, my standard interview invite. And he called me up. And, my phone number's there. And I goes, dude, this is unbelievable. You're responding to an email with a phone call, and we became for 30, 40 minutes. We zapped in so close, and neither
Yeah.
of us had to type. And it was so remarkable and so memorable. He broke the mode of electronic word. Ding, 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 ding. So
Well, and again, to your point, think about how different and what's so I want to go back to what I was saying about Faustian deals. So
yeah.
Faustian is it, that was was it Proust that he wrote where the guy makes a deal with the devil. And
Yeah.
that's where the term a Faustian deal comes from. So it's by me saying that, that's a value judgment because the devil is a value judgment. The devil is related to all things evil and bad, right?
Well,
So
everything has value. Everything you can make a value judgment on because you're using words. But if you taste, just to stay on that for a second, Rob,
sure.
I'm sorry, but I always use this. Think of way back when humans first grew radishes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they would taste the red part and go, yum. And then did they throw the greens away? And my one friend goes, no, I use radish greens. Well, most people don't keep radish greens or carrot greens. They go, well, you don't eat that part, And so where did the human come and go, oh, I'm going to make a value judgment. It's bitter. Well, who invented the word bitter? And some people might think bitter is good. So there's a progression in humans to form values, to form aesthetics, and to form points of view. It could be hardwired in it, or we could have invented. So go ahead. Yeah.
So one thing that I like to do is I break things down to their quantum. Now, traditionally, when you do this, or at least when I have done this, I think about the most reductionist thing and the here and the now and in the past, but not always in the future. What is this? What like in its most concentrated form? What will this look like in the future? And I think that that's very difficult for people. But going back to what you're saying about the radishes, well, when we use good and bad, what's the quantum of that of that sort of activity of value judgments? What's the purposiveness of that? And my belief, just to tell you where I'm coming from, is that it's based again in the utilitarian principle of, okay, well, hey, I got these radishes, I can eat the whole thing, but now I've grown potatoes. So now I have some choices here. So I can keep what I like and discard what I don't like. So, this part doesn't taste very good. So I'm not going to eat the green part.
Yeah.
And again, what I'm saying is that the quantum is like, how did we get to this point where we start making choices?
Yeah. Well, I would say it's if you study, if you're asking me the question, if you just study anthropology on where humans start shifting and changing, there's, you can pursue that in neuroscience, and anthropologists study that deeply. And, when did it happen? But we know that now it's thumbs up or thumbs down on social media, and there's a lot of value judgment, and it's not that it's again good or bad. Value judgment. Now, I was going to say one thing about value judgment is McLuhan says this thing that sounds a lot of some of the things he says sounds kooky, but that's because he's guessing in the mode of being academic. So, in the mode of being an academic, literature-based book writing guy, he was doing guessing. So he teased people to believe his guessing was academic. So if you see his blurb,
well, that's all academics is, though. That's
right. But they don't want to admit that, because if you see his Wikipedia thing, it will say media theorist. He would go, I don't do theories, but he would probably go, believe that, because I want them to think that it's a media theory. So it's like shifting the ground. It's also, besides form and content, it's figure ground. Study Gestalt therapy. It's something Marshall was all about, was like, if you look at a landscape and you go, there's a palm tree, you're saying that's the figure. The ground is the sand, the ocean, the clouds. So, and the tree. So everything is involved. It's a big picture. So now take this idea. When we invented the vanishing point in painting, where it goes,
Mm-hmm.
the painter makes it look like there's a dimension. That's when McLuhan said we started having point of view, which is, if you think about it, that's funny, I think.
Yeah.
But it could be. It's interesting that zooming, everything was flat. And then the painter said, no, we're going to do point of view. So then we're going to do vanishing point. So that's point of view. So it focused our eyes through painting to think, oh, that's the figure, instead of saying the ground. One more little example. They showed people in Africa a movie. They weren't used to ever knowing anything about moving pictures or movies. They're showing them this movie. The characters are acting, and it's a farm scene, and the chicken runs through the scene. All the viewers wanted to know is, where'd that chicken go?
Right.
They didn't care about the protagonist acting in the middle of the screen. They had a different perspective of seeing, because they were like, oh, there's food, there's a chicken, where'd it go? Well, it just ran through the scene. That's just background in the film. So
and kind of to feed off of that, but I don't know if you've ever seen a film and it like where you there's only one of the series. So not like the Avengers films where there's like 1,400 of them, but this is one film. It's like a sci-fi film. And after that movie, you think to yourself, how did that character get from that scene to the next scene? I don't know if I'm explaining this very well, but we create a universe within this film that we're seeing. And that to me is so profound, is that because we don't see the character, get on a ship and then go to planet Zarkon and, fight the bad guy. We create that missing bit of information in our minds to make it make sense. And I find that that's so fascinating that we do that. I wonder what the name for something like that is.
But that's this time-space continuum. That's Sun Ra. His birthday was just the other day, the great jazz shaman. He said space is the place. So he was speaking metaphorically, but he was also very cosmic. And when humans try to nail time, they try to say, I know what time is. Okay, the moon comes up, and then that's going to dictate, oh, the sun's up, now the sun's down. Okay, I'm going to use that to dictate when I go to work and have birthday parties. Okay, let's go back. There's two things you brought up, Rob, that's very important in your last statement. You're a great communicator and you're a great listener. And I appreciate this, because that's what I asked you. What your aspiration is to increase the fact that humans can learn to listen. That's communication. McLuhan said, communication of the new is a miracle. Is not impossible. No, is a miracle, but not impossible. Communication of the new is not impossible. Oh God, I always get this wrong. Is a miracle. The communicating something new is a miracle, but it's not impossible. We can do it. It's not impossible, but it's almost miraculous when it happens. In fact, I'll interject the joke that goes along with that. The priest is crossing the Canadian border, and the custom officer says, excuse me, Father, what's in your flask? He pulls his flask out. He says, oh, it's water. And the custom officer says, let me see that. And he takes a swig out of it, and he goes, that's whiskey. And the priest goes, it's a miracle. So, this is a miraculous meeting between me and you, because to me, I'm regurgitating all my old, learned ideas, but in regurgitating them, I'm learning new because your input's important. And that what you were talking about was the time-space continuum. We had to invent time. A very important hidden ground to McLuhan and James Joyce was a guy named Wyndham Lewis. He was an artist in England, and they like to discount him as being fascist or bad guy, but an incredible artist. And he said something that's very important. He said, artists live in the present and write a detailed history of the future.
Right.
So we're living right now in the present, exchanging ideas. We're living now. All times are happening now. That both Zappa and James Joyce said that. All times are happening now. So we're writing a detailed history of the future. So there's your thing about the sci-fi film. How did the character create this time-space continuum? And there's, this is trying to live in the present and not worry about the past or the future is what artists do. That is what music. That's why Roger Stephens loves Bob Marley, because when Bob Marley played a song in front of him, he was present in that moment. That's the function of music, is to be in the moment. Walter Pater said, all art aspires to the condition of music. Music's so cool that painting, literature, Zooms, SteamYard, everything wishes it could be cool as music.
Right.
So, music is, but we ruined music by recording it. Now, I don't mean ruin it. We changed it. But I have a friend who collects every medium to record music. Cylinders, vinyl, every medium. Brad, did we ruin music recording it? Yeah. He knows it's he didn't ruin it. He knows that it is a sacred act to be present. You play music live and your people are there, which is what we're doing now. We're playing music. We're dancing.
This is true jazz, because we're just riffing.
This is dance and jazz. And so that whole idea of time is like, why did humans have to invent time? Because that's where when you have the film medium, you can do something that we talked about earlier, is how do you live life without being dictated by time, by a movie? Because in 90 minutes, you can live over time. So,
like, and like a complete story too, right?
Complete story. You watch somebody like Tarkovsky, the great Russian filmmaker. Most people can't take him. It's like 3 hours and there's, not many cuts and they're long takes. And they're like, this is boring, because they're so used to quick takes and editing. And they're like, just settle into it and stare at a tree for 5 minutes, And so, they can't do it because they're so brainwashed to believe you're supposed to edit. It's the same thing with Finnegan's Wake. People think you're supposed to read a book and it's supposed to have a story and it's supposed to tell you something, character development. But what if it's all gibberish? And it still moves you because you're reading it out loud with a group of people. It sounds like music. It sounds like you're dreaming awake. That's why Finnegan's Wake is named after a song. The title is Finnegan's '(S) Wake. That's the name of the old Irish song. Joyce, here's back to Zappa. Joyce, he knew that Zappa would say this. There's a lot of connections between James Joyce and Frank Zappa. He says, Frank said, the crux of the biscuit is the apostrophe. meaning the most important thing in the biscuit is the apostrophe. Take the apostrophe out of the word Finnegan and just call it Finnegan's Wake. No possessive. So it's not a guy who is on a building fixing the roof. He fell off, he died, and then they had a wake for him, a wake service. And it was Finnegan's Wake. And the song's all about Finnegan's Wake. And when you're like Irish culture is you party when someone dies, you drink whiskey, and you have an open casket, and the whiskey bottle goes flying across the room, lands in the open casket, drips the whiskey in the dead man's mouth. Whiskey means the water of life. It wakes him up from the dead, and he goes, "Hey, I'm not dead." And they all go, "Hey, you're supposed to be dead." And they beat him. And so Joyce said, "I'm going to change it. I'm going to get rid of the apostrophe and say, all you people, all you Finnegans, Rob, Roger, everybody, wake up and figure out what your inventions are doing to you." Meaning, you can dream. Well, let me just finish it. I'm sorry, I'm blabbing.
No, go on.
But most people create amazing scenarios in the middle of the night while they're sleeping. They dream. And I can tell you all this stuff about dreaming in a second, but the one major point is that artists use that creative power also while they're awake. So they're dreaming awake. Yeah.
Whoa.
So I'll leave it there for a second until you come up, because I know I want it to be more of an exchange. So I don't.
Well, and I think that's, and Zappa sort of talked about this with the censorship and Tipper Gore and all that stuff, right? Which I thought was hilarious, because one of them, Susan Baker, looked like she was from Barkersville circa 1876. Like, it was like, this is crazy. Yeah. Anyways, there's the satire again. Like, I laughed hysterically when I saw what this PMTF lady looked like. I forget what the actor. Yeah, what these censorship people look like. They look like religious, fanatical, like, we need to put the Christ back in Christmas kind of people. Anyways, that's an aside. But what you're sort of telling me is maybe that's what true freedom is, when we kind of liberate ourselves. I mean, the idea of the show, the symbol for it, I don't know if you could see it at the top right there, but it's a wolf. It's a wolf coming out of a cave.
Oh, that's good.
And it harkens back to Plato's allegory of the cave, and how all these people, what's old is new again, right? And what has been has always been and will just be made again, kind of idea. But Plato's allegory of the cave, there were these prisoners locked up in the cave, and they would do these shadow puppets in front of them, and they'd be entertained. They'd say, "Oh, that's so cool. Wow." Yeah. And the fire kept them warm and stuff, but they were still prisoners. And then one day the one guy gets freed, and he goes outside, and he's blinded by the sun. And then he's kind of like, "Oh, what the hell is this place?" And then he had to go find food, and he had to work for it. The Matrix, right? Take the red pill, the blue pill. I should have taken that other pill. Why did I have to wake up to this nightmare? And then he goes back, the guy who's released from the cave, and he tries to free his friends, because he's like, "Dude, it's lonely out there. Can you come can you come hang out with me?" I'm making this modern, I guess you could say. That's anyways. And the one guy says, "Don't fucking touch me. I want to stay here and watch my finger puppet play. Piss off." And the guy does. But it's kind of like with what we're saying, and not to give any value judgments. I use cell phones, but it is impacting the way we communicate. Yeah. Am I fully present? I can't be when I'm on my phone and I'm trying to look at and enjoy my 20-month-old daughter at the same time. I can't do it. Yeah. Because in theory, you can't multitask. You can only give 100% of your attention to something at a time, and anything else, you're diverting your attention, right? That's why the principal always says in the assemblies to the school children, "I need your undivided attention." And all my life, I had no idea what the fuck that meant. And it meant, don't look at me and look at the Canadian flag at the same time. Look at me, right? And the fact of the matter is that our attention is far too easily divided in this day and age. It happens to me, and I like what you say about the value judgments. Try not to say bad or good. This is just what it is. Yeah. This is what it is. Yeah. And we are an adaptive species. Think about COVID. You know, yeah. we pretty much had to go subterranean for a fucking year, right? We've become troglodytes, right? We here we are in our dens, you know, and this is how I'm communicating to you because the nuclear fallout's out, which, by the way, that's why the internet was invented. It was invented so that we could communicate in the case of a nuclear war. How about that for a mind fuck? Anyways, here we are, right? But when we say, oh, this is, why can't it be the way it was? That's the problem with, well, not to say, I like what you say. I think that's a common misconception that the way it is. But we can wish our lives away wishing it was like it was back then. But nobody can invent a time machine, and thank God for that. So we have to realize where we are and adapt to it. And I think that therein lies what the artist does.
Yeah.
It can harken back to the past by creating something right now and echo into the future by doing something right now. And that is that flow state that we talk about, that I'm a huge proponent of. I mean, when we communicate right now, it's like, oh my God, we've been talking for an hour and 6 minutes, right? Time really shows its fallibility as a concept when you're doing something you love. To me, you're like, oh my God, 3 hours went past. Meanwhile, I could hang out, you know, at a boring friend's house who just likes talking about sports because I can't communicate about sports. And it's like, oh my God, we've been talking about this for 2 hours, right? And it's like, no, it's only been 15 minutes. And it's like, oh, Brett Favre's a great quarterback. Well, Rob, he retired 15 years ago. Oh, okay, right? So that's what I'm saying is when you do what you love, time really kind of loses its real power in my experiences.
Yeah. Well, let me jump off on a couple things you said. When humans invented, you keep in mind these three forms of word communication. Spoken word, printed word, electronic word. Before there was spoken word, there might have been just gesture and grunting. We don't know, but something like that. So there was no word for birth or death. They didn't have words yet. And so they might go, oh, someone just came out of that woman's body. They didn't know, well, it was something we did 9 months ago together that caused that. There wasn't science. They didn't necessarily know words. So the inner and the outer, the interior landscape, the inner monologue, and the outer monologue were not separated. Then we separated the inner, the consciousness, the subconsciousness, the unconsciousness. Then we separated that when we invented words. So, you know, you really go deep into Gutenberg Galaxy. Marshall McLuhan wrote 22 books. All you got to do is read the titles of each one. But when you understand that how words affected us. In fact, he said an amazing thing. He said, word is the most addicting universal drug. We invented words and we're addicted to
it. Yes.
That's not bad. But again, it does have disservices, but we need words and we're using words now. We could have done, Rob, we could have done this whole thing for 3 hours with hand gestures and eye contact. And, you know, your viewers would have gone, that was the coolest show you ever did, you know. But what you said, that was one thing I want to say about separating the inner and the outer, because when you go to artists and you understand what poetry is, T.S. Eliot said that poetry is outing your inner dialogue. So there's some voice inside your head. How do you get that out? Like if you're a musician, you have some feeling inside your head inside your mind, inside your consciousness, and you get that out through the instrument or through some words. So that's outing this. And what you said also was really reminded me of, how do we reinvent this Faustian dilemma we're in? And it's whether we recognize it or not. An artist doesn't always have intention in mind. Like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to reveal the hidden psychic effects of our inventions so we can cope with them. They just are making art. Like, kids making art is the greatest thing that illustrates McLuhan's favorite line. The Balinese have no word for art. They do everything as well as they can. They don't go, we're doing art now. They're just living. And Duchamp said something again that you have to understand. There's no solution because there's no problem. So as soon as you say, oh, we got a problem here, then you go, well, now we got to seek a solution. No, everything is just is, and it's how you deal with it, how you cope with it, how you play with it. So we're not in a worse state now or a better state. Humans have always been in this state, and it's how you reinvent these problems, which we go, oh, no, that's a problem. Every time there's a volcano and I stand underneath it, I die. Well, then move. Okay, the solution is moving. Okay, so, you can suss. It's not to deter from problem solving. It's that as soon as you say that's a problem, then you're highlighting it and empowering it. So it doesn't, it's sort of like Zen. If you study Alan Watts, Alan Watts said, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Now, that's a very heavy statement, because a lot of people say, if you don't acknowledge your enemy, you empower them, but
because they're going to keep doing what they're doing.
That not necessarily. You're telling,
or that's
your enemies. Your enemy is your best teacher. The Dalai Lama said that last week on his live podcast, and he says, I got that from Shenandoah. I think is an Iroquois Indian. The American Indians, you can't say that word anymore. So whatever. The Iroquois and the Cherokees, these people who lived in America, they said your enemy is your best teacher. So breakdowns are your best teacher. If you have a breakdown,
absolutely,
then how do you flip it into a breakthrough?
I can't. Okay, so I have to do this on air. I got to take a quick 10-second bio break, but I have a question for that. So give me 1 second, because it has to reveal with our society. So I want you to think about this actually while I run off. But in our society, it's almost like toxic positivity, I like to call it. And it's almost like we avoid, and this is that I didn't coin that phrase, toxic positivity. A good friend of mine said that to me, and I'm like, oh, I love that. And it seems like in parenting, and what I do is I work in parenting, right? I like to say that I'm a parenting coach at times, but are we trying to remove breakdowns away from people? And if that's the case, then what are the consequences of that? What's the quantum moving forward? And I'll be right back.
Sure. And if you want to know more about my events in discussing these fun topics, you can go to laughtears.com. That's the word laugh, Laugh, and the word tears, Tears. So it is a word that James Joyce invented and put in his book, Finnegan's Wake. It basically summarizes the human condition. You laugh and you cry. You fall and you get back up. So it's all about redemption. And so, I just told your audience about Laugh Tears, because that is the name of my website, but it summarizes a lot what we're talking about. You laugh and you cry. So Joyce added 2 letters to the word laughter and made it Laugh Tears. So that's the human condition. You laugh and you cry. It's like, you don't have to read Finnegan's Wake. All you got to do is say the word Laugh Tears, and it's the DNA of 628 pages of gobbledygook. And
Whoa.
so it is something that I stress the most is what I learned from Frank Zappa was how to embrace contradiction. So you turned me on to a term, toxic positivity.
Which is
How,
an oxymoron,
which
or
is a,
seemingly so,
it is
right?
an oxymoron, and it is a contradiction in terms. But how can you embrace that? Because you can know what toxic means, and you can know what positive means, and you can flip it, a rejection into a redirection. And I'll tell you someone that I want you to look up. Her name is Carolyn Casey, Coyote Network News. And I do recommend people listen to her radio show, watch her talks on YouTube. And she combines a little new agey green environmental activism with astrology, but she is such a great wordsmith. And
Hmm.
it is so beautiful. And I'm lucky that I'm finally going to interview her soon. And she's called a trickster. She's a Coyote Network News. And it's how you navigate contradiction. And just to go back to Frank for a second in toxic positivity, in the middle of one of his songs, he says a true Zen saying, nothing is what I want. And that's a heavy statement. And it's very simple. Nothing is what I want. Frank's sort of making fun being a Roman Catholic, raised a Roman Catholic, and then went against, he doesn't want to be considered a Catholic. He says, I'm a devout capitalist. But he was repeating this amazing contradiction like toxic positivity. Two more lines he said that really resonate with toxic positivity. I will love the cops as they beat the shit out of me on the street. Now he's making fun of hippies saying love, peace, love everybody. Well, you're going to love the cops when they beat the shit out of you? That's what else can you do? You have to love your enemy. You don't have to, but you can choose that. The other one is I'm not black, but there's a whole lot of times I'm ashamed that I'm white.
That's trouble every day.
That's trouble every day. So he,
Yeah.
he knew how to embrace contradiction and, navigate it. Toxic positivity.
And even in that, I mean, with Frank Zappa and all of this idea of iconoclasm is that we will always need someone to battle against, against whatever direction that we're going in. There will always be a culture and there will always be a counterculture, and they need each other. Just like, I mean, think about in the States, there was a whole, the charge on the Capitol, and there was some serious satire there. The one guy with the horns on sitting at the desk talking, and then the cop coming in saying, like, this is like the most sacred place you could possibly be right now. You should probably piss off. Anyways, I found that whole thing, like, he didn't say that, I'm paraphrasing, but it was just like, it was so absurd. That captured what I think chaos is. It was horrific, but there was also moments of like, there was this one guy who was saying like, listen, I'm all for this, but you can't be doing that. It was just, there was something human about that. And, in every sense of the word, we saw what lawlessness looks like. Now, this kind of brings up what Zappa was about, and he was against censorship. He was laissez-faire when it came to creation. It was like, just do it. And this taps into the parenting piece, because cancel culture, oh man, it has created the extreme right. The extreme left has created the extreme right. Like, that's this balancing act that has been happening since, that's the culture, that's the counterculture. And what I was getting from Zappa is that you can put advisory things on the record so that kids can't buy them. But what are you, the parent, doing? It's your responsibility to teach kids that this is life. The world is not a pink cloud that you fly on in your fluffy rainbow. You know, it's a, Thomas Hobbes said, life is nasty, brutish, and short. So that made for the excuse to create an absolute dictator to keep people in line. This is where I'm going with absolute freedom or absolute control. But the reality is that we as parents need to do better jobs as parents. If my kid wants to, like, I remember I bought an Offspring record when I was like 4 years old or 5 years old. I played Doom when I was 4. That game is, you're going around shooting satanic beasts. Like, no wonder the teacher wanted to talk to my parents because the only color I used was black, right? Point being is that why don't we have conversations with our children instead of trying to protect them from these things? Yeah. This is what life is. This is what life is. Frank Zappa talked about Faces of Death and how he watched that show with his children. And then he was like, guess what? They want to be vegetarians now. That's what you're saying about these. That's what I'm getting from turning our breakdowns to breakthroughs. Perfect. Instead of trying to make children who we sand down all these jagged edges so they don't get a paper cut, get a paper cut. You know, like, don't run across a busy street. That's when I'm going to grab you by the collar and be like, hey, what the fuck are you doing, right? But hurt yourself, learn yourself, explore life. I mean, why do you think so many children struggle with anxiety and depression? Because their parents don't trust them to be children.
Yeah.
Right?
No, that's really good. Let me address some of these things you just brought up, Rob.
Yeah. I'm spitfiring, so.
No, that was really good. This is a fun exchange of ideas because, again, you stressed your aspiration is to teach people how to listen, and it gives us a chance to exchange ideas by listening to each other. And the one thing on cancel culture is, my friend sent me a postcard. She lives in Missouri, and she says, do you think cancel culture is cool? And I went, look at, cancel culture has services and disservices. Now you said, oh, it created the extreme right. You know, what it is it's another form of called critical thinking. And then what do? Oh, well, I boycott this kind of grape because they're spraying pesticides and they're making the Hispanic people who pick them get poisoned because I want to eat that kind of grape. So then you go, okay, we're going to boycott eating those grapes. That's a form of cancel culture. That boycotting is what cancel culture is. It's just that it's gotten to an extreme, so it's branded. And then if someone says one word wrong, then their career's gone. So then how do you deal with extremity in critical thinking? There's a lot of gray area in there. You know, when Me Too came around, Catherine Deneuve, one of the most beautiful and talented actresses ever, said, wait a minute, have you ever heard of an awkward come on? Sometimes men can come on awkwardly. And they think, well, I'll just touch her on the butt and see what happens. Maybe you'll, and they'll go, you can't do that anymore. Okay, then let's establish the boundaries. And okay, I don't want to do that. But if you're going to cancel all the males who ever put their hand on a woman's butt, she was saying, wait a minute, that was an awkward come on. Let's suss this out. So it's how you deal with. My sister taught me a real important thing. Key to successful relationships is how you deal with what you don't like about the other person. Yeah. So if the teacher says to your parents, Rob's doing this and he can't do it, or we're going to kick him out of school, or they sit him down and goes, Rob's doing this, let's talk about this. Rob, why are you doing that? Oh, blah, blah, I saw that, blah, 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 blah. Okay, let's talk about it. Well, what's deeper here? So critical thinking is very important. And there's various degrees of it. And it's been pushed to this catch-all phrase called cancel culture, which again has services and disservices. So whenever anything breaks big, the one we did today in our group was re-entry anxiety. I go, I don't want to re-enter. I love it where I am right now. A lot of people are like that. Keep me away from that. You know, when the COVID first hit,
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah.
the coyotes and the animals started raiding the cities. It was like, there's no more cars. The animals are free. This is amazing. You can see the clouds. The
Right.
air pollution's gone. So again, it's how you cope, how you deal with these. One other thing my friend said is a great thing is called nuance culture. So
Mm.
why not flip it to nuance culture? Like, where's the nuance here? Like, how can we deal with this? But I think the most important thing, bringing up parent coaching, and I could be misinterpreting this McLuhan thing, but I like to talk about it because it's really simple. He said, experience shapes our behavior when understanding should be shaping our behavior. So let me just explain
Can you sorry, can you say that one more time?
yeah, experience. Well, I'm gonna read the quote exactly how McLuhan says it. And I'm not saying I know what he means, but this is my interpretation of it. And I like this saying because it's sort of where you're coming from with your parent coaching. He said, everybody experiences far more than they understand. In general, no, sorry. Everybody experiences far more than they understand. Yet it is experience rather than understanding that influences behavior. So, what I'm about is how does anything shape our behavior? How did spoken word shape our behavior? How does SteamYard shape our behavior? Okay, the child comes in from the cold. You're in Canada, you get a cold winter, comes in from the cold, and their fingers are freezing. You say to them as the parent, honey, if you get really close to the stove or the fire and rub your hands together, and learn the dynamics of heat, you can get your fingers warm. Or you can say, don't touch the fire. That's experience. Understanding is teaching, propagating, navigating the dynamic of heat. If you go, do not touch the fire, you'll burn your hand. Now, the kid might learn better by going, and burned his hand. He goes, well, I'll never do that again. Then instead of this. So we don't know which way is better to learn. It's wide open. But McLuhan's thing, understanding is not having a point of view, again, resonates because we want to say, burning your hand is bad. We want to say, that's not good. So don't do that. You know, back to when I was a kid, I could go to the grocery store and I could not look on the magazine rack at Playboy magazine. That was hidden. But I could look at Man's World and they would have some pictures that would like excite me. And I was like, oh, okay. So that was called censorship. They could now, you got to realize Frank lived in a censorship world, so he had to adapt to it. It was a push and pull thing. It's called jujitsu and judo. It's a push and pull thing.
Right.
You can say I'm against censorship, but we're all in censorship because we're all critical thinkers. But just to finish my point really fast, nowadays you could go into a bookstore like Barnes and Noble, and if you're a kid, they won't let you look at Playboy, or you're like, the security guard goes, you can't look at that. But you can go look at Art Forum magazine and see Jeff Koons penetrating his girlfriend in a piece of art and go,
Right.
no difference. That's even more X-rated, but it's called art, and I can look at art magazines, but I can't look at Playboy.
Well,
So
and almost hear me out for a sec, but it's almost like a form of cultural appropriation, maybe in some extents, because I remember when I was in grade school, when I was like in grade 5, and we would look at all the National Geographics and be like, okay, you're going to make a picture montage. And then a couple kids would find the Sudanese indigenous people of, wherever, say,
Right.
Sudan, right? And then they would be naked and they'd be like, whoa, look, tits, right? And it's like, okay, but or for example, when Pamela Anderson is like, stop killing the whales, and it's like, you don't know why they're doing that, right? And that's virtue signaling that we talk about. I think that that's something that we need to be careful of. Is, I mean, you make a great point of, when we say, well, this is good, but that's bad. I think what we're really doing is we're having to make we're making hasty generalizations.
Yeah.
We're like, okay, so we can move forward. It's like when we agree to disagree, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, so we don't get stuck here for the next 5 years trying to figure out the exact proximity we need to be from the fire so that we get the most optimal heat. Let's just say, don't put your hand on the fire, right? Get close to it, but that's where this, well, that's good and that's bad. I think it's sort of like the utilitarian principle of, we need to carry on with the show. I think that there's a piece of that in, again, like you said, language. What you're saying, something about languages is forever slavery. And have you ever heard of this guy? Yuval.
Oh yeah.
Noah.
Oh yeah. That's
amazing guy.
That's a really important book. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's saying that stories is everything. And everything is just a creation of stories. I mean, you think about our financial system, it's built on credit. What is that? It's just an idea, right? It used to be built on the gold standard, which was a tangible thing. Now it's just built on zeros and ones that are stored inside of the internet, the computer. If Jeff Bezos was like, fuck it, I'm just going to pull out everything right now. I'm going to pull out my 98 billion followed by 9 zeros out of the bank. What's going to happen? The world will fall apart. It won't even be able to do a handstand, right? So there you go. These are just ad hoc stories that we're telling ourselves so that we can carry on with our existence. But I think nowadays, more than ever, we're starting to realize, and this kind of goes into what I'm doing, that this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. That we've created culture to tame nature, but really it's just the emperor's new clothes. He's still buck naked. Right?
Good. Well, you brought up a lot there, Rob. I appreciate it, because story is everything is an extreme statement. And I always say I say the first aphorism I ever invented on my own, but someone else said it, is the only absolute is that there are no absolutes. And the whole point of aphorisms, it's very important to understand. I can quote a million great thinkers, but the whole point of an aphorism is to have an epiphany. Oh, that's a cute thought, but reinvent it. And I'll give you one of my favorites, again, from the great Canadian Bob Dobbs, who said, Andy Warhol said, in the future, everyone will be famous for 15 minutes. There we are. We're on Rob's show. We're on YouTube. Everyone can be famous. He said, no, reinvent it, reword it. In the future, everyone will have privacy for 15 minutes. Good luck. So you can play with these words and flip.
Right.
So story is everything is a fun, thing for this person to say. And it's often said stories are food. David O'Brien invented one of the greatest video games ever. It's called Mountain. And I saw him speak at the Ann Arbor Film Festival, and he said, fuck storytelling, it's all empathy. Now that was interesting because his video game is just a mountain floating in space, and it's not a traditional video game, but it became very popular and it's very, well regarded. And we want to believe storytelling is maybe innate in humans, maybe it was invented. We don't know. Before we had spoken words, when we just were grunting and pointing, were we telling stories? Are the cave paintings story?
Mm.
Or is it just their magical way? Like if I draw a picture of an animal, it will come into the field and we'll catch it and eat it. So we don't know why cave paintings existed. We don't know about cave dance and cave music. We can watch Werner Herzog's film and it says certain ideas. We can study it, anthropologists, till the cows come home, but we don't know. And that's the beauty, is we don't know the intention or motive behind art. We can say, I have an intention in creating my art, but once someone creates their art, it's no longer theirs. It's the user. The user
Right.
is the content. And you got to realize that McLuhan wrote 22 books from 1940 to 1980. Right in the middle, he rebooted a lot of his main ideas.
Mm.
Medium is the massage, medium is the message, became the user is the content. So you look at those video games you grew up on, or you look at that book Sapiens, you are the content. Rob is the content. What
Right.
he is saying, you're pulling out of your, own. In the point is to make new myths, new stories, new questions. The Irish, where Joyce came from, James Joyce came out of the Irish culture, and it's prominent in other cultures, is you Irish people answer questions with a new question. And they go, we do, eh? And that is, this is what's important when you study film studies as deep as I have for so many years, which again, I think films are stupid. Why live in this entertainment world? It doesn't mean that films haven't affected me deeply. But since I lean towards experimental film, that's more my
Mm.
background. Peter Greenaway, the English filmmaker, said, cinema is much too rich a medium to be left to storytellers, because cinema movies are about 138 years old. That's not very old.
Right.
And most of it is just filming plays. It's like, oh, here's a story. Now put the pictures.
Oh, yeah. You're
But
right.
there's experimental filmmakers. In the best example that is accessible to everyone is 2001 by Stanley Kubrick. In the middle of
Yes.
2001, he takes abstract animation and he helps tell the story with the abstract animation. If you take the Stargate sequence out of 2001 and enter it in an experimental film festival with nothing else, they'll go, oh, that's just a bunch of lights coming at me. That's not necessarily storytelling. That's a visual experience because it's a moving image art form. But most filmmakers are not using it as a moving image art form. They're using it as a storytelling art form, and they're filming plays. They're
Right.
filming theater. So it is possible to reinvent art forms. This is what Zappa did. He took, this is called alchemy, where you take two known things and you put them together, and then you come up with a third unknown thing. So I'll give you two examples. Frank Zappa took rock and roll and theater, and he put them together and invented theatrical rock. Now, it's a debatable subject. Screaming Jay Hawkins did it before him, whatever. But that's, we're going to say, he also invented chamber rock. He took orchestral classical music and he had a rock band play it, not an orchestra. And they
Mm.
sounded like an orchestra. And he made rock, which is loud, to be quiet and subtle. You listen to It Must Be a Camel on Hot Rats, and you know why my friend took it to Nadia Boulanger, who basically taught Aaron Copland, Philip Glass, Steve Reich, Quincy Jones, the great teacher in France, and she was blown out when she heard It Must Be a Camel. So here's the key, Rob, that Frank was an alchemist, and he created a new thing out of two known things. Then here's the punchline. He satirized his own new thing. Preston Sturges did the same thing. It's called screwball comedies. Preston Sturgis is who the Coen brothers want to be. And if I said that to them, they'd go, thanks for the compliment. He took wacky, wild comedy and sophisticated filmmaking, blended them together, and came up with what's called screwball comedies. But in the midst of this new thing, he sort of invented screwball comedies. He satirized his own new thing. Same thing that Joyce did. He turned the eye experience of reading into an ear experience. That's sense ratio shifting. When you invent something, it usually is dominated by one sense. When you invent cinema, it's dominated by your eyes. When you invent words, it's more an eye experience. Cinema's eye and ear. But when you invent the bicycle or the car, you amputate your legs, and it's sense ratio shifting. Your senses, all five senses, if you think of these five senses. So Joyce said, I'm going to help you understand what reading does to you by making it, you have to read it out loud with a group of people. So your second body pulls away and watches you read the book, and you go, oh, that's what reading does to you. It's sort of like what fasting does. When people fast, they do without something that they're used to. They can suss out what it does to them, how it should. I was lecturing to art students in Philly, 40 kids there. I said, this is many years ago. I says, everybody in this room have a cell phone? They go, yep. One kid goes, nope, I don't. And everybody laughed. And I go, why don't you have one? She goes, well, I lost it. I'll have it. I'll have the new one next week. Okay, well, you're a good example. You're like fasting with no cell phone. How'd it make you feel? She goes, I have clarity. Now, that was the heaviest statement for her to suss out, because she was just saying, she could have said, wow, my grandmother's dying. I can't stay in tune to the news. She said one service, which was, I have clarity, which was a beautiful thing to say to me, because it helped me illustrate my an idea that if you do without, if we did StreamYard for the rest of our lives, 24 hours a day with Rob and Gerry, and then we go, okay, let's take a break for 1 week. And then we had a meeting and say, well, what happened? Then we're going to go back doing it 24 hours a day, StreamYard with Rob and Gerry. But we could suss out by doing without it. This is what Duchamp did when he invented conceptual art. He said, art is an eye experience. You go into the art museum, you see a painting. You walk along, you see another painting. You walk along, you see another painting. This is my friend's theory, how he invented conceptual art, which I think is brilliant. He says, oh, let's take that middle painting and send it to this other museum on loan. So you walk into the art museum, you see a painting, you see no painting where a painting should be, and then you see another painting. So it was like, how do you deal with the not art that is not there? So he would put a snow shovel hanging on the wall in an art museum. You can relate to this because you deal with snow in Canada. He called the snow shovel, which he didn't make. He bought it at the hardware store, hung it on the wall, said, that's my art. And he named it in advance of a broken arm. So it was all about the relationship of the title with the object, and it made it a head trip instead of an eye trip. So he invented conceptual art. And this
I get that. Just like a concept album is an idea, right?
It's an idea. It's a concept, conceptual. And this is the difference. What we've done in our time together, Rob, is concept and percept. Concept is a con job. I'm making a value judgment. I'm being a hypocrite. it's conning you to believe that things are the way they are, and never anything is the way it is. It's always in flux. But we
Right.
can say, hey, my shirt is green. Well, no, it's lime. Oh no, well, let's just call it green. So, we're going to go along because we got to name the color of my shirt. But percept is perception. It's intuition, impulse, feeling, guessing. Lily Tomlin's great writer, Jane Wagner, wrote the line, reality is just a collective hunch. I'll ask you a question now, Rob. Is perception reality?
Well, oh, wow. I mean, so before we get to that, the idea that concept and precept, those things, percept.
Dude,
Okay.
this woman wrote a press release for me for a big film festival, and she changed the word because she thought, no, you're meaning precept. I says, no, it's like
right.
It's from perception.
Yes.
It's easy to mix it up. Conception and perception. Concept is something we have to deal with. I don't mean to make a value judgment. We have concepts. We have percepts. How do you navigate? Yeah, go ahead.
But they're both in constant flux. Like
totally.
I mean, and then just to add to it, like 5 years from now, if someone's like, hey, when you spoke to Gerry, how did you feel? I could be like, oh, because I'm thinking about all the cool things he said, like, oh, yeah, it was so awesome. But right now, it's like, really, I'm on a journey. It's like,
yeah,
like I'm following along, but then afterwards, when I have my afterthought on it, which is me trying to solidify my memory, I'll say, oh yeah, that was great. But throughout the time, it was like up and down, up and down. So yeah, I mean,
the journey. Let's go on that word for a second, Rob.
Journey.
Well, no, you answer as perception. Is perception reality? But here's the funny thing, just to keep in mind. In the 20s, when Duchamp was in Paris, in the 20s, Joyce moves to Paris in the 20s. All Joyce is doing is listening to shortwave radio and writing it all down. That's Finnegan's Wake has 64 different languages in one book.
Whoa.
Yeah, you'll have a ball. Read it out loud to your kid every night, 2 lines. You will have an advanced human being there. And then so the kid will get it. But they're sitting in Paris, and what comes about is a thing called flaneur or psychogeography. If the journey is more important than the destination, then why do we even have to seek a destination? Why do we have to name a destination? The cliche is, oh, the journey's more important. So they really propagated that by going, I'm just going to wander aimlessly, and I might bump into into an epiphany. In fact, Joyce nailed it. He says, I'm after epiphanies in everydayness. If I stub my toe, I could have an epiphany. If I read Sapiens, I could have an epiphany. What's the difference?
But here's where I'm going to eat the devil's avocado here. And here's the Faustian part.
Yeah.
But you're talking about, the journey. But if you get on a ship, here's where economics plays into it. We all have to get paid. We all have to survive in this system that we exist in. Just like Zappa said, I'm a devout capitalist, right?
But
because
stay away from that have to. We're
We're engineered. We're socially engineered
Socially engineered. Boy,
yes.
You know great words, dude.
Yes, we are engineered.
This is highly advanced because you spew stuff at me that I like to use. Social engineering is a really important word. So yeah, I'm
sure I got it from you. Yeah.
But but I haven't said it until this point. You said it. So you got it from reading. That's all right. But I just rip it. But you pulled that out, and I'm not saying you can't. Saying we have to is we are destined to believe the work ethic and not, live off your parents.
Yes. And just like we use this, like when I was doing a little bit of religious studies, we talked about parables. One of them, Jesus talks about, like the seeds and how, you have the faith of a mustard seed, and that a bird would eat the seed and fly off. And they're like, what does that mean? I'm like, well, in biology, how plants move from places is the birds would eat the seeds and shit them out, and then the rose bush would grow there or whatever. And they're like, oh, but really parables are just interpretive. From what I gather, and
that's
going back
to content, that's back to users content.
Yes.
Look at John Waters, the great filmmaker, cheered for the Wicked Witch of the West in The Wizard of Oz, or the Wizard of Us. But with most people cheer for the good witch. But so did he have to? Did he want to? Was it bad that he was cheering for the bad person? Well, that's, simulation theory is heavy. It's like, how much do films affect these kids growing up and make them go kill people? That's the hidden psychic effects of our inventions. If we can study them, we can suss out how they're shaping on our behavior, and then we can learn how to cope with it. You're going to have kids watching movies and say, I killed my parents. I killed my parents. This is in Rodney Asher's new film about simulation theory. It is important to study that the kid killed his parents because he saw some movie and he says, I reenacted that movie. Now, it's deeper why he killed his parents. But he says that it was because the movie taught him that. So are we supposed to get rid of the movie? Stanley Kubrick did something really heavy. When Clockwork Orange was a controversy in England, his home, the UK authorities came to him and says, dude, you got to pull this film off the screens in the UK. He did it for 30 years. Did it cause kids to go beat up winos? Well, he knew it didn't cause them. It was part of the zeitgeist, and it might have contributed, but it wasn't the cause. But he said, okay, so was it more? My big thing is he knew it was a great PR stunt. That he might have. My friend worked with Stanley Kubrick. He says Stanley was about family and friends, family and films. He wanted to protect his family, so these hoodlums wouldn't beat up his kids. But he knew it was a stunt that people in other countries would go, I got to see this film. He censored it in his own country. Well, it wasn't censored in America, and kids could go to the London and buy bootleg copies of it. So, we don't know. This is the most important thing McLuhan learned from James Joyce is causality.
Yes.
Causality. And this is,
yes,
Rob, we really go full circle. We're covering the whole gamut here. This is the heaviest thing that McLuhan taught. One of them is effects precede causes. That the effect happens before the cause. And you know who invented that was Edgar Allan Poe. He invented the detective novel. He said, I'm not going to tell you everything that happens. I'm only going to tell you so much. So then you'll figure it out and you go, I know what happens. And then you get involved. So it's not, and this spawned the symbolist poets. And they basically say, it doesn't matter what you write. Just ask Bob Dylan, Patti Smith, Kurt Cobain, Jim Morrison, all the rock poets. It doesn't matter what you say. It's how it makes you feel. So the effect, you go for you paint the effect. You don't paint the painting, and that's effects precede causes, and causality is, in my opinion, impossible. You can never figure out what causes what. You can study the patterns. That's the big thing. The guy on the news today died from the COVID vaccine. Well, there were other factors involved, but they could 99% we can prove that caused it.
To me, that's confirmation bias. When we just want to see the part that we like so that it fits our schemas, but not all the other pieces that it took to get there. Like the fact that the guy was overweight. He had a heart condition, all these other, it's just, he took the vaccine and then he died. Oh, ding, 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 ding. There's my dopamine connection, right? So it's, and really, I said this in an episode about religion, but sociology tells us that we're all just groupings of individuals.
Yeah.
We're all just individuals.
Yeah.
And I think I said that earlier, I dated twins, or I was talking to somebody else today, actually. I dated twins, like a twin or whatever, and identical to her sister, but they were completely different in their likes. What I'm saying is that we are all individuals, right?
Yeah.
And we have this weird us and them mentality, but that's again that utilitarian principle so that we can just carry on with our lives. You know what? There's that tribe over there. We're this tribe. We got this team. We got this jersey. And that's what made Frank Zappa dangerous, is I don't think he really picked sides, which is why he was an iconoclast. If he was around today, he would be much like ourselves. And and then the other thing that I loved about him is how calm he was in stripping people down. At least whenever he was on live air talking about censorship, he was able to just state it factually without the appeals to emotion that we're so prone to. That hurts my feelings. Oh, because that hurts your feelings, I'm not going to say what I think might help us, right?
Yeah.
And I think that could be the extension of, the quantum moving forward is, what is the trajectory of this? Where are we going? If we silence ourselves because of we're hurting someone's emotions, well, are we helping that person? Right? Are we helping that person? Because here's the other thing. I see myself as a pretty forward-thinking person and very open-minded, but I will ask the difficult questions, because the fact of the matter is that there are wolves out there in society, and they will shred you to pieces because they don't give a shit about your feelings, right? There are some ignorant people in the world. And that's why we need to stop with the friendly fire and be able to have these conversations and just say, I don't know about that. I mean, that sounds a little hokey. What do you mean? This is my life's work. Back to what you're saying, our breakdowns are our breakthroughs. Yeah. That's what makes us a stronger society, right? Yeah. It's our ability to build ourselves up from our failures.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
That was a great contradiction you just made, but it was important. And I'll say why. There's a lot of ignorant people. Frank Zappa said stupidity is the building block of the universe. It's not all. So ignorance and stupidity, however you want to, not knowing. If you understand the history of art, most artists want to not know. They want to get away from knowing anything and just let the natural flow out. So not knowing is important. Why do you ask a question? My friends say, that's a stupid question. I goes, well, that's the nature of questions if you don't know. So, so how do we cope with it, what you call ignorant people? We treat them as humans, and they're
absolutely.
And you can't say you're stupid for believing this, or you can't hate. You can hate people. Is hate more culturally learned? Is hating more innate or more invented? Is constantly explored in our groups all the time. But hating probably is innate because it's called survival of the fittest. And it's just how far you push it,
How do you dismantle a troll on the internet? Like there's trolls and they're like, whatever, you voted conservative. And it's like, okay,
you don't dismantle them. You don't empower them by giving
what you do is you talked about jiu-jitsu, right? And there's a saying in jiu-jitsu that there's nothing more dangerous than a half-efforted move. I'm paraphrasing here, but it's like, I'm going to go in for the neck choke, or I'm going to go for the arm. And then they get knocked out in the face, right? If you're going into something, you got to go 100%. And I think that what can actually help, again, in jiu-jitsu is that you almost use their momentum against themselves, right? And it's like, well, tell me more about that. And they're like, well, I wasn't expecting this person to ask me a clarifying question of my outrageous beliefs, because I'm just gaslighting this person. And that's such a
let them stick their foot in their own let them stick their foot in their own mouth. You don't have to force it.
And again, what's old is new again. That's just that's the Socratic method.
Yeah.
Socrates would walk into situations and be like, well, what's religion? And they'd be like, well, religion is when you pray to the gods. Well, how do you pray? And people would be like, they're like, he did what children do best. And they ask why
Yeah.
questions. Because kids, they want to get to the quantum of things. Children are scientists. You hang out with a kid, that's a scientist right there. You're looking at, Newton. I can't even remember his first name. Jesus, I'm getting tired. But anyways, that's my point, is that, oh man, kids are so fascinating, because as they grow up, they get cussed down, and it's like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? And then they stop doing that.
Yeah.
Isaac Newton, thank you very much for it. Somebody just commented, forgettable vendetta. Isaac Newton.
Oh, that's
beautiful,
good.
Beautiful mind. But that's just it. And I think, going back to what you're saying, and what I think is what's better, nurture or nature? Well, you know what? You need both. Like you're saying, what came first, consciousness or feeling?
Yeah.
The chicken or the egg? You need both of them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's the key. Balance.
That's beautiful. My favorite genre of music is funky, and I go, it's got it right in there. Fun is the key.
Oh,
and your calmness observation of Frank is good, because watch Marshall McLuhan on YouTube with Norman Mailer. Very important writer, Mailer, but you'll see him be all uptight and edgy, and Marshall's just surfing around him like so smooth and suave. And Frank does lose it occasionally, and Marshall loses it, but mostly is in staying with a calm demeanor, you're going to get a lot accomplished. In fact, what Woody Allen did by taking Marshall McLuhan and putting him in the movie Annie Hall, he epitomized like making a modern thinker, a philosopher, pop culture hero. That's pretty cool that he did that. And you could see it on YouTube, short little clip. It's only a minute or two, and it's very revealing, because Woody made Marshall say a question as a statement. So here's how Marshall would say it. You mean my whole fallacy is wrong? That's a question. And Woody had him say it as a statement. You mean my whole fallacy is wrong? And that's the opposite of Marshall. He wasn't about statements. He was about new questions. So it's still interesting that it really resonates with the other McLuhan thing, that half a truth is still a lot of a truth. So I like your whole thing. Another one of my students taught me that about jujitsu and judo is, the one who wins the battle is the one who doesn't fight the battle. They know how to maneuver around even having the battle. And
well, I mean, think about like I love stories down through time, but Ares, he was the god of war, but also the god of rage, and he would always lose his fights because of his rage.
Oh, really?
I mean, here are these timeless messages, and then you think about it. If you try to fix your car pissed off, that's a really good way to drop the car on your head, right? It's just, there's that energy again. You will get a lot more accomplished, calm, and thoughtful than you will by saying, why don't you get it? Or that's offensive. It's like, well, why don't we examine why this is offensive? And I think as a society, we need to pick up in terms of stop being so punitive. Here's a value statement. We need to be less punitive and less correcting, and like, this is the way it should be, and try to be a little bit more educative. Like, where is this coming from that you're saying this? And why might it be problematic? And that's how you undo the Trumps of the world.
Yeah, that's diplomacy. And also, I'm going to ask you another question that I always ponder is, anger can be a productive emotion when? Like, rage can be a productive emotion when? So you're saying, let's be calm, let's study, let's suss this out, what's going on here. But it probably is hardwired or innate in humans to have rage and have
survival.
Yeah. Oh, so when anger can be a productive emotion, when fill in the blank?
It could be so rage. it's why they call it anger management. It's not anger, it's not Clockwork Orange, like take it out of your brain. It's managing it, right? Because if you're in a situation where you need to use that to survive. But the thing is, when we're having a conversation, no one's going to pull out a gun. Hopefully not anyone's going to pull out a gun when we're talking about censorship and shoot you in the face, meaning that you're safe. So us getting so pissed off and irate is really, that's actually a lazy, that's just being lazy, I think. Right?
Very,
like, how dare you say that about my Christian values? And it's like, well, why the fuck do you have those values? Like, why don't we talk about that? Right? We got to stop putting up stone walls to ourselves. And that, I think, is the key, is that, I mean, I'm really good at getting into arguments with my wife, because I say it like it is, and then I let her say it like it is. And I'm like, shit, that's a good point. Right?
That's, there's a cliche that goes, this is a great book by McLuhan, From Cliche to Archetype. It goes, women know, men suppose.
Yes. Yeah. Well, you know what? Okay. So man, speaking about flow state, we are at 2 hours, and we got to jettison. So we got to do this again, Gerry. I mean, I've had such a great time speaking with you.
Let me read a couple little things, if you don't mind.
Please.
Because you're so sophisticated. I think this is really important. And I brought up Tarkovsky, who's an important Russian filmmaker.
Mm.
Read about him. Check out his stuff. He's important. And Stan Brakhage is one of the granddaddies of experimental film. And so at Telluride in '83, Brakhage was introducing Tarkovsky. And I think this would apply to a lot of what we're talking about today. He said, I personally think the 3 greatest tasks for film in the 20th century. So let's just flip that. The 3 greatest tasks or possible tasks for us in the 21st and 22nd century are to make the epic, to tell the tales of the tribes of the world. 2, to keep it personal, because only in the eccentricities of our personal lives do we have any chance at the truth. 3, to do the dream work, that is to illuminate the borders of the unconscious. I just love how he puts that very poetically. Brakhage was quite a character. He made squiggly, abstract color films. And he said, don't talk about your art. Just let the art speak for itself. And then he'd talk about it for 2 hours. So again, that's embracing contradiction.
Right.
And so again, this is Mallarmé, who is the symbolist poet who came out of Edgar Allan Poe. Symbolism is an important poetry movement to study. He said, don't paint the thing itself, paint the effect it produces. McLuhan would quote this all the time. To define is to kill. To suggest is to create. So there's your calm.
Whoa.
So there's your be calm and suggest. That's creative. To define, this is the way it is to kill. So, I don't like the word kill, but we'll use that. And then just in, another joke that I always like, you were talking about individuals. I love this story. Monty Python and the Holy Grail, the guy's preaching before a huge crowd and he goes, repeat after me. We are all individuals. And everybody goes, we are all individuals. And one guy yells out, not me. And that was, I said that so many times in my lectures. One kid finally told me, he says, that's in the extras on this DVD. That was an extra who just threw that line out spontaneous. And the director said, okay, leave that in. That's wasn't awesome. Even written in the script. And so, I'll go to two quick jokes that McLuhan loved to say. And then the final line is this is Alfred Hitchcock's favorite joke too. 2 goats are eating film coming out of a film can. and one goat turns to the other and says, the book was better.
That's awesome.
Two caterpillars. This is about our inventions, how our inventions shape us. We shape our tools, then they shape us. Two caterpillars are on a branch and they see a butterfly fly by. And one caterpillar says to the other, you'll never get me up in one of those contraptions. So,
Right.
Rob, it's been an honor and a pleasure. I love you. And I appreciate this amazing experience of you listening and sharing time with me and talking. The balance. So I'll leave you the words of Marshall McLuhan. He said, carefully make plans, then do the opposite.
Sage advice. Gerry, thank you so much.
Oh, man. Wait, I got one more prop here I was supposed to show. Let me see where it is. Oh, here it is. Here's the closing shot. Bye, Rob.
Take care, Gerry. Thank you very much. Everybody, Gerry Fialka. Thank you.
Bye.